We welcome everyone to our Wednesday evening Bible study. If you turn your Bibles, please, to Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter. We're in Lesson 8. This is the third speech that Moses makes to a new generation of God's people in Israel. And what we see in chapter 28, it's a very lengthy chapter, we see blessings and curse. You don't have anything between. God's going to bless them, or they're going to be cursed. The first 14 verses are blessings. He blesses them, as we see in verse 1, above all the nations. So look at them as a nation, God's people were. He would also make them a holy people, verse 9. And in the midst of all of that, they're having abundant harvest. They're having abundant blessings. They're going to be abundantly blessed in the field and in their own bodies with children and their own stock with livestock and so forth. They will be blessed in all those areas. We're talking about how intrusive are the curses, how much they infiltrate with blessing their entire life as well. So then we see the curses, and really the curses are from verse 16 to the end of the chapter. Now we got down to where we're looking in the midst of the curses that comes upon them. We saw how intrusive they are. And this evening we'd like to take question number 11. Serving God with joy and gladness would be forfeited. Why should they be serving God with joy and gladness? Why would that be something that he says forfeited? Notice verse 47 is where we are. Because thou servest not Jehovah with joy and gladness, and with the gladness of a heart, why would they ought to be serving God with gladness and joy? What were the blessings going to be? They're going to bless them how? Abundantly. So here they're having the harvest, here they're having things that happen in their lives. They have children, they have flock, they ought to be full of joy and gladness. Because God has done what? He's blessed them. He's blessed them. But that's not happening. By reason of the abundance of things that's happened, therefore shalt thou serve thine enemies that Jehovah will send against thee in hunger and in thirst and in nakedness and in want of all things. He shall put a yoke of iron upon thy neck until he has destroyed thee. Who's doing that? God is. How's he doing it? Using nations to destroy them. God sends nations upon nations to destroy nations. That's God's temporal judgment. His hand is on it. And here he has a theocracy of God's people, and he judged them as if we were fighting World War I, World War II, whatever. But God was behind this because they were not serving God with gladness, because here they're getting things and they're not happy and they're not looking to God that he's blessed them. So they go off into what? Idolatry. And God brings forth these nations upon them. A yoke of iron upon your neck. What's that a symbol of? That's right, slavery. They're going to be brought into slavery and serve the other nations. That's very true. And that's what we're looking at upon the people that go off into captivity. So that's kind of what he's promising them. Did that happen in Israel's history? Here are people getting ready to go into the promised land after 40 years of wilderness. And he said, that's going to be ahead of you if you don't choose life, if you don't choose to serve me with all of your heart and soul. So there's where we get to see continue these curses. Now, we ask this question, number 12. What would the people do? Now, let me get back to number 11. We hadn't talked about it. What about the darkness? What darkness is going to be ahead of the people who don't keep the commandments of God? What darkness do you see here in these verses, 53, 54 through 57? Sum it up for me. What is it? Can we say cannibalism? Well, we would never say that. People would never go into cannibalism, especially God's people. You want to know how dark it is? That's what what we're observing here. Your Bibles may have a different translation, but let's talk about a man in this text. He has delicate eyes. What does that mean? He's tender, has delicate eyes. A woman would not put her foot and slam it hard up on the ground because she's delicate. What are we talking about, a fashion show? What does it mean? And your Bible may say it differently. What does it mean here in these verses? 53 and 54, and starting with verse 52, that about this delicate people. That's right. It means gentle and tender. Though they would be gentle and tender, they'll eat their own. He said that's only animals. That's what animals do. That's what people do. Now, there's another word that's here that'll help you understand what's happening with warfare during this time. It's called besiegement. How would nations conquer fortified walls, very high, very thick? How would they conquer people behind those walls? And that would say, that's besiegement. That's the way sieging a city would take place. David? That's right. That's right. There's no food coming in, and there's nobody escaping. And so after a while, let's say 2 years, 2 to 3 years, Jerusalem took that long for Nebuchadnezzar to take it. And that's what's going to happen in this future. And he's laying this down for a new generation. Indeed, what would come. Verse 52, and they shall besiege thee in all thy gates. See, cut it off all the way around until thy high and fortified walls come down, wherein thou trustest. You know, you trust in your power and your nation. We're fortified. Nobody can conquer us. Throughout all the land, and they shall besiege thee in all thy gates throughout all the land, which Jehovah thy God hath given thee. And thou shalt eat the fruit of thine own fig tree. No, your own body. Your own body. The flesh of thy sons, thy daughters, whom Jehovah thy God hath given thee, in the siege, in the distress, wherewith thine enemies shall distress thee. The enemies are distressing you because you're not getting any food. And after a while, you get hungry enough. Your tender eyes will look evil to your little babies. Oh, you don't like the woman that does that? The man that is tender among you and very delicate, the American Standard says, which I think is very descriptive of gentleness and tenderness. He's delicate, tender. He says, shall be evil toward his brother, toward the wife of his bosom, toward the remnant of his children, whom he hath remaining, so that he will not give to any of them of the flesh of his children. No, you're not going to get my kid. He's mine. He's my next supper, my next dinner. This is how dark gets in our sophisticated and tender thoughts about who we are. And you get to the point of this type of hunger, whom ye shall eat, because he hath nothing left him. He has nothing left. In the distress wherewith thine enemy shall distress thee in all thy gates. You can blame it on the enemy. This is how cruel he is. Remember in Jerusalem, if God had not been gracious to them and made the conquering of Jerusalem by the Roman army quick and swift, not many of you would be saved. By God's grace, it ended pretty quickly. But they also had that in Jerusalem. Oh, women, they would never do this, would they? The tender and delicate woman among you, who would not adventure to set the sole of her foot upon the ground. She's that tender. I might step on a bug. I might cause trouble here. I'm tender and delicate. I'm gentle. I don't ruffle anything. And that's wonderful. She says, thy eyes shall be evil toward the husband of her bosom, toward her son, toward her daughter. Doesn't make any difference, daughter or son. It doesn't make any difference if it's her babies. In fact, maybe that would be the most humane to do to the child. They don't really know anything yet, and I will eat the child that cometh out from between her feet. There's your babies. And toward her children whom ye shall hear, whom she shall bear, for she shall eat them for want, and she will do it where? Secretly. Because that's just cruel. But that's what people do. I remember stuck on 45 for a whole day, and seeing eyes of people with big fancy cars and big cheap and little cheap cars, all in the same predicament. And we could not go find any food, and we couldn't find any gas. And you know what the great commodity was? Toilet paper. There's our society, toilet paper. And people just frantic. What are we going to do? And they were stuck on the side of the road. And at that time, their big fancy cars out of gas just like everybody else's. And you say, how could we ever get there? I saw where we could get. We would fight probably after a while over toilet paper. My wife's going to have toilet paper. No, my wife's going to have that. It's the last we got. Too bad. We'll fight over it. Why would you ever do that? Because you're desperate. And when we think the human condition go through on hurricanes, are people civilly humane to get the last bottle of water off the shelf? No. What about Christmas time? What about getting my sneakers, my televisions? Man, he's capable of anything. I read in Genesis where the world was so bad that God destroyed it, and violence was there, and they were with violence. Why would people be violent? I can see them be unholy, being not serving God and not believing in God and making fun of Noah, but violent because I'm in power, I can will my power, I will shut you down. And I'll take what you have if I want it bad enough, because I'm in power. How you get it? I'm just more powerful than you. And you're more powerful than me. And you take it. Didn't make it right? Wasn't any laws? Who cared about the law? It was there. We don't have laws. We don't respect God. We don't respect man. And we're going to get what we want. Don't think the human condition can't get there, because it did it in history. And we're not any different. And we'll rationalize. I'm not going to let you eat my child. If anybody eats that child, it'll be me. You get to thinking like that. And you think you're being humane. But they still did it secretly. They did it secretly. In the siege and the distress wherewith thine enemy shall distress thee in thy gates. Blame it on the enemy. Blame the enemy. God's bringing the judgment. But that's warfare. That's how dark it can get. I remember going into Russia as just going over there to cross the lines and seeing what socialism does. It's not the most economical way of distributing goods to where they're needed. And they don't care. They're going to only care about the people in power, that they're going to get thirst. I remember going over there, and we were hungry. We had to wait 6 hours to get over into the deal. The guy was with me, we said, we'll get to that store. And there was nothing on that store but moldy old bread, and we took it. We took it because we was that hungry. How could a nation, Russia, do that? That was him. You didn't want to get on their elevators. Their cities were dirty. Their railroads were people throwing up all the time. And I remember thinking, that's our enemy? Those young men are so drunk, they wouldn't know how to go fight. They're drinking all the time, throwing up all the time. I said, I don't want to live in a society like that. I'm so thankful to be in America. But we can become barbaric as well when we have no higher standard than God. We don't have God anymore. It's my standard. You're seeing what power does. He'll flat lock you down. And we don't really care about what it does for you. We'll care about what we want to care about. Men can get that dark. Question 12. What would the people do if they truly fear God's name? So we want to get off of that darkness, and now we want to see if you really truly feared God's name, what does he say in verse 58 that helps us understand that? If thou wilt not observe to do all the words of this law that are written in this book, that thou mayest fear this glorious and fearful name, Jehovah thy God. So I'm turning that verse backwards and say, all right, what would it be like? I know what it's like when I don't do that, but what is it like if I really truly fear his name? What does that look like in my life? What is it? That's right, but you will fear thy glorious name because you will observe to do all the words of this law that are written in this book. I'm not going to do words of law that I think it is. It's what's written in the book. That's what you're going to do, and you're not going to leave any of them out. That's what it means to fear Jehovah's name. You think his name's great? Yes. Is it a glorious name? Yes, Jehovah's God. Then do all that he commands you to do. That's fundamentalism. That's not Christianity. That's godliness. And to be a fundamentalist doesn't mean I set up a bunch of rules and the rules save me. No. This is what we learn what it means to fear God. You reverence God. And the reason we say, well, you reverence God because we can see what you do. Read the first two chapters of 1 John. He'll tell you what it means to know God, what it means to be in God, what it means to abide in God, what it means to really prove you love God. And you will be doing this, doing his will. And so doing all the words of this law is how you fear God's name. All right? Number 13. What irony would take place in the lives of a disobedient Israel who had been freed in Egypt? Now, was this generation, they're younger babies now grown up in the 40 years of wilderness. They may not have known what it was like to be in captivity and slavery in Egypt, but their parents did. And there was some in that age group that remembers that. And what he does in these curses, he begins to tell them of what it's going to be like. So what irony is it? So what's the irony in this? And this takes us through the next few verses after verse 58. He'll make the plagues wonderful, the plagues of thy seed, even greater plagues. Verse 60, he will bring upon thee all the diseases of Egypt, which thou wast afraid of, and they shall cleave unto thee. We're afraid of certain diseases, aren't we? He'll chase after you, and it will cleave to you. Also every sickness and every plague which is not written in the book of this law. There'll be other plagues that he didn't write about that's going to get you because you're turning against God. And you shall be left few in number, whereas you were the stars of the heaven. There again, a remnant is all that's going to be saved, coming back to Jerusalem after they're in captivity. Verse 63, it'll come to pass that Jehovah rejoiced over you to do good and to multiply you. So Jehovah will rejoice over you to cause you to perish and to destroy you. God doesn't like the death of the unrighteous people. But the sense here is that he's doing his will. And so there's a sense of his will is rejoicing because he's bringing judgment upon them. He's bringing judgment upon them. But it was not to completely destroy them. It was to refine them. It was to get them, as we'll see in this study, to come back and to enjoy the blessings that he has before them. Jehovah will, verse 64, Jehovah will scatter thee among all the peoples, from the one end of the earth to the other. Verse 65, among those nations thou shalt find no ease. There shall be no rest for the sole of thy foot. But Jehovah will give thee trembling heart, failing eyes, pining of the soul. And thy life shall hang in doubt before thee, and thou shalt fear night and day, and shall have no assurance of your life, of the life. Just pause there for a moment. Is that a nice way to live? What does he mean? You're going to long for the night, then you're going to long for the day. What does that mean? I don't know what's left. Why would you be longing for it? Yeah. That's right. And it comes on, and then you won't out that because it's so bad. When is it going to be noon? When is it going to be evening? Come on, I'm in trouble. And then we get down to, I think, the answer we're looking for. He says, in the morning thou shalt say, would it were evening. That's your point being emphasized here. And at even thou shalt say, why would it were morning, for the fear of thy heart which thou shalt fear, for the sight of thine eyes which thou shalt see. And Jehovah will bring thee unto Egypt again with ships. Are they literally going to go back to Egypt? Literally. Are they literally going to go back to Egypt again where they were before and be under Egyptian bondage? Or does he use this as a metaphor? Because they're going, notice he says, they shall be going with ships by the way thereof. What's going by ship back to Egypt? What's that imagery of? What? By ship? What about slave ships? That's what he's talking about. And what's so the irony is, you've been in captivity before. You're going to go back into captivity. And look at the last verse. And no man shall buy you. You don't even rate to be bought as a slave. How you feel now? At least they use us to make brick. We don't even want you. You're willingly going in to captivity because you disobey God. And maybe you're on ships willing to go into another country to find your power, because we'll see God's people appealing to the power of Egypt and the power of other nations. We'll send the ships, and maybe the ships are commerce, but a lot of times slave ships would work during that day as well. And you willingly turn to the nations. You're going to be their slaves. It's going to be the tail wagging the head when you, Israel, could have been the head wagging the tail. But it's not that way anymore. These are the sections of the curses. And what's happening, no man shall buy you. You'll sell yourselves unto your enemies for bondmen. I'm coming in the ships of slavery to Egypt. That's a metaphor. And they don't even want my services. I can't even be a slave. And chapter 28 ends with that type of curses. What was it hinged upon? You're going to obey me with all of your heart. You're going to love me with all of your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And therefore you'll treat others as you would have to be treated. We see cannibalism. We see diseases. We see a fact of really becoming slaves again. And you just cast off. God's cast you off. But he wants them to learn lessons from it. And that's where we get into chapter 29. Any questions on the darkness connected with the curses? And really, 29 and 30 is a rehash of what we've seen from the law in Deuteronomy. There's nothing new. It's Moses preaching. It's driving home the points that have already been made, as a preacher would, to get them to exhort them to do what is right. And so we enter chapter 29, and we looked at the irony. In chapter 29, what two words are connected to God's covenant, helping us to know the makeup of a covenant? We talk about new covenant, we talk about old covenant. Do we even know what a covenant is? And in the Bible, and in fact in these verses 2 through really verse 13, if you went there are two words that ought to stand out. And I'm not saying you use the words that they have, but the two words that give the concept that I want you to have, two of them, that really describe covenant. Now, if you and I make a covenant, we'll probably have something you like and have something I like that we just agree on. We just agree with God. Well, and they say, well, God, I like it to be this way. And God says, well, I like it to be this way. Let's just come to agreement. We'll make a covenant. That's not God's covenant. It's one way. And yet it's two ways. So what word would you see, or would you offer for describing what covenant is with God and Israel? Well, that'd be confirmation. But let's start with God. What's God's side of the covenant? What has He done? He's spoken the law, but that law tells you what to do, and those are conditions. But let's start behind the conditions. Does He make promises? I'll make a promise to do something. Let's enter a covenant. This is my promise to you, O people, that this is what I will do. And so He begins to do that. And he reminds them what He's done before. And He's going to bless them, continue. He's making the promises. Now, before you think about that, and let me just add another thing. I want to look at verse 1. These are the words of the covenant which Jehovah commanded Moses to make with the children of Israel in the land of Moab, besides the covenant which He made with them in Horeb. I thought we only had one old covenant. What seems to be happening here? There seems to be a covenant where? What was the covenant in Horeb? What mount is Mount Horeb? Mount Sinai. That's where what came from? The commandments. That's the law. We got that covenant. There's the law. These are the things that are commanded you to do. And so there's indeed those conditions that must be met if you're going to follow my covenant. But so what's the covenant in Moab, where they are now? Is it a different law from Horeb? Or a new audience? Which is it? It's just a new audience. That generation's gone. And so I'll make it just like I made it with them. He gives a new generation. Just like we saw in Deuteronomy 5. This is a rehash. Just like He did in Deuteronomy 5. Didn't make it with your fathers. Made it with you. He make it with Abraham. He had made promises to him. But this covenant that's codified with their responsibilities toward Him, His point was making a promise. So what we see is that Jehovah, in verse 2, you have seen all that Jehovah did before your eyes in the land of Egypt, led you in the wilderness and so forth. And so he did that. Now, let's look at, maybe I want to look at two verses to get my point, then you can agree or disagree. Keep therefore the words of this covenant and do them, that you may prosper in all that you do. So there's the words of this covenant that you do. Now there brings in your law. That means these are the requirements. And it said that's what you do, that you may prosper in all that you do. How intrusive into our lives, or how deep into our lives is the blessings. It blesses you everywhere. He's named that. It's going to happen to you people that are with me in Moab, and you're getting this same Ten Commandment law and all the same laws that your forefathers got. But that indeed is what their part is. But look at verse 12. He says, that thou mayest enter into the covenant of Jehovah thy God, and into His oath, which Jehovah thy God maketh with thee this day. So He's making a covenant, but what word does He use here to be connected with this covenant? An oath. What is an oath? I promise to do something, and I'll seal it with what? I stand before God, promise you to do that. Why did God use oaths? I mean, His word, He can't lie. But why would he do that? To just ensure the hearer that this is something you can depend upon. Now tell me, what oath is he emphasizing here? What particular oath is he referring to that's at the very heart of this concept of covenant that he has with his people? We've seen it over and over and over again in Deuteronomy. And sometimes we may overlook it. An oath. He's just making promises and he's going to keep them. I wrote down a few. I just want you, because this is important to Deuteronomy. Go back with me to Deuteronomy 1 and verse 6, the very first chapter. Do you see oath here? Jehovah our God spake unto us in Horeb, saying, Ye dwelt long enough in this mountain. Turn you into your journey and go to the hill country of the Amorites, unto all the places nigh thereunto, in the Arabah, in the hill country, in the lowland, in the south, the seashore, the Canaanites, and so forth. And verse 8, Behold, I have set the land before you. Go in and possess the land which Jehovah did what? He sware it. What's that? When you swear, not cursing, you're taking an oath. Which Jehovah sware unto your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give unto thee what? The land. Remember Genesis 12 to Abraham? He made a land promise, make his nation great in this land. And all of a sudden, what are these people getting ready to do and crossing the Jordan River and going into the promise? What? Promise what? Land. And he made a covenant that he would do, and he swore to those. Told me to Deuteronomy 6 and verse 10. It is the thread throughout Deuteronomy. So it's not, well, he just promised things. No, he promised some specific things that he would give them. And in verse 10 of Deuteronomy 6 and verse 10, notice he speaks of that same oath again. And it shall be when Jehovah thy God shall bring thee into the land which he sware unto thy fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give thee great and goodly cities which thou buildest not. You're going to get the land. You didn't build them. You're conquering the nations. Chapter 9 and verse 5. For not for thy righteousness or for the uprightness of thy heart dost thou go in to possess their land, but for the wickedness of these nations Jehovah thy God doth drive them out before thee, that he may establish the word which Jehovah sware unto thy fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and to Jacob. It's not because you're so great, Israel, it's because my covenant, my covenant I swore to give it. And I swore it not to Abraham, but to your fathers, Jacob. And he speaks about this. We're not through yet, because we'll go now to Deuteronomy 30 and verse 20. So we get past this point, and we're still looking to that. To love Jehovah thy God, to obey his voice, and to cleave unto him, for he is thy life, and the length of thy days, that thou mayest dwell in the land which Jehovah sware unto thy fathers and to Abraham. So what was the covenant? I promise to give you the land, and I seal it with an oath. I will do my part. What will you do? You obey my commandments. And God says both of those things that have to be done, or we have no covenant. And what do the people do? As we've already said, they ratified, said, we'll do it. We'll do it. And there's your covenant. But the oath was the key that I wanted you to see, because we just been seeing the word swear, but it's the land promise that's being emphasized here, and that's what we see as part of the makeup of the covenant. Any comments on that before we close? All right. What great purpose was God striving for, constantly delivering and providing for God's people in their deliverance from Egypt and the wanderings in Egypt? We kind of hit on this in these verses, but what does he take them to? And what was he trying to get them to do? Let me bring out one thing that I think is important. He says in verse 5, I've led you 40 years in the wilderness. Your clothes are not waxed old upon you, and thy shoe is not waxed upon thy feet. Ye have not eaten bread, neither have ye drunk wine or strong drink, that you may know what? What's the purpose? You may know that I am Jehovah your God. Remember when we were in Deuteronomy and at the 8th chapter, and we talk about the manna that God gave them. And I wanted you to see something that we just said, well, I know Jesus was tempted by the devil and he was turned stones to bread and all of that. But look at what led up to why they have that. It was God teaching them something. I don't want to miss it. Deuteronomy 8:3, he humbled thee. He suffered thee to hunger. To do what? And feed thee with manna, which thou knewest not. Neither did thy fathers know, that he might make thee know that man doth not live by bread only, but everything that proceeds out of the mouth of whom? Jehovah. Who made him hungry? God did. You're going to be instructed in something. I'm going to make you hungry. I'm going to give you bread that you don't even know. And you'll know that it came from God. You're going to depend upon me. All of these blessings, their clothes didn't wax old. That should happen. 40 years, and I'm still in the same shoes. And we've been walking. Clothes not waxed old. You're not drinking the strong drink of the nations. What do you do with the nations of the country of Sihon, king of Heshbon, and Og, the king of... You take their land. And you divide it among the 3 tribes of Israel. Manasseh, the half tribe, Gad, Reuben. You've got those. They divide that on that eastern side of the Jordan River. All of that was to drive them. That you're going to have to depend upon me. God would never make anybody hungry. God tests all the time. Are we listening? Do we listen to those difficult times in order to realize that man does not live by bread alone, but from God? He gives us that which sustains us. And that's the point, I think, of this. What great purpose was God striving for when he does all these blessings? Not to make their head be boisterous, but to let their head reach up. I depend upon you, O God, because only God could have made this happen. And that's what he was trying to get them to see. Any comments on that? And we'll have to close. All right, we'll start there, Lord willing, next time. And lesson 9 and lesson 10 are back there, and we'll continue to finish up Deuteronomy. Thank you.